Well, visual studies are pretty important today because visuals permeate our culture. As we've gone digital and as things have gone to our phones, as we're more and more connected to our phones, to our tablets, to our computers, visualization has really emerged as a way to quickly digest and present information. It's always been a part of our culture. I think in the era when books were predominant, of course there were illustrated books, but we were a word culture. But as our media have become more multimedia, as digitalization has permitted more and more media forms to interact, the visual has really crept out into the lead. It's an efficient way to communicate, especially if we know how to interpret it. And that, of course, that's what visual studies are about. Ways of framing, understanding both the potentials of visual, the traditions of the visual, and really the kind of expressive uses and capacities of the visual. So one of the things that really excites me to be back in Budapest and back especially at Central European University is the prospect of the Visual Studies platform. This is a really important component. This is a pretty unique organization, unique in terms of what its ambition is and what its stance is in troubled times, but also unique in terms of how it's organized knowledge. And I think this is really a kind of a component that needs to be more outspoken, especially as we move into an era of, we are deep into the era of big data and it's only going to get bigger, but ways of visualizing that and developing literacies around that visualization process are critical. As I mentioned earlier, we live in a world with increasing numbers of images thanks to, most of us are getting a lot of our information from cell phones. Information has to be distilled into quickly accessible forms. Usually that means visual. More than ever, it matters for just about every discipline to develop a kind of critical competence in terms of understanding those visuals and helping to explain to other people the limitations, but also the affordances, the possibilities that those visuals have. So it's really great to see the initiative here. Something that pops up in the summer workshop, something that's pretty clear in the assemblage of courses that have been gathered together. It's really an essential move, and it's terrific to see. Of course, this is the place where it's happening. There was a sort of shift in the population that attended university post-war. But with that shift came new kinds of disciplines, area studies, things like women's studies, regional studies, American studies, Asian studies, and with that, media studies. With that emergence of a kind of interdisciplinarity, visual studies also started to emerge in a pretty clear way because they have so much to do with different disciplines, with history, with anthropology, archaeology, even literature to some large extent, medieval studies. The visual is a strong component of all of those and was kind of aggregated out of those into a domain, at least as far as publishing is concerned, and in some universities, as far as curricula are concerned, that domain of visual studies really started to stand on its own 2 feet. So I noticed, for example, a lot of people, when they talk about documentary, talk about what's the reality on the other side of the screen, but they don't really talk about the screen itself as a structuring device. They don't talk about the agency that's involved in structuring those images. What are the implications of framing a shot one way versus framing them another? They prefer to talk about what's on the other side of the camera, the profilmic event. And that strikes me as really leaving viewers in a vulnerable position. They're not necessarily in a space to be critical about what they're experiencing. So yeah, I think being critical is probably the key skill. And those critical literacies take a lot of different forms, both, as I've suggested, understanding historically where images come from, how they've been shaped and part of our culture. Different cultures have different ways of imagining and thinking about the visual. Also understanding what are the representational capacities of our different imaging systems. If we don't really understand what those differences are, then we really have a very difficult time analyzing or being critical about our experience.